Okay, I'm Lewis from Racism Fight Imperialism. We're here on the streets of Manchester today. It's part of an international week of action in solidarity with Palestinian prisoners, particularly Ahmad Sa, who's leader of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. He's been locked up for over 4 years now in solitary confinement in an Israeli jail. He's been sentenced to 30 years in prison, but there's also 5,000 other Palestinian prisoners locked up in Israel. Every single one of them is a political prisoner. They're all people that stand up for just for the right to be Palestinians and not to be occupied. And there's also 200 Palestinian children locked up in Israeli prisons. So this is a part of an international week to raise awareness and also call for the release of those prisoners.
So, I mean, what's the objective today? What are you actually asking people to do?
So today we're asking people to, on Market Street in Manchester, there's loads of shops that, for example, there's loads of shops on Market Street in Manchester that are stocking Israeli products, like Tesco's that are selling Israeli fruits and vegetables. There's other shops like shoe shops that are stocking Caterpillar shoes. Caterpillar makes the bulldozers which are actually knocking down Palestinian homes, military bulldozers. And there's other shops like Marks and Spencer's that have a particular political and economic link with Israel. So they've won awards from Israeli governments because of the amount of trade, the amount of economic aid they've given to Israel over the years. So this is one thing that we can start doing. We can start by boycotting Israeli goods, and we can start organising, in our local area to make people more aware of what's happening.
I mean, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict would seem to be complicated to a lot of people. Do you think it's complicated?
I think the way that it's treated by the media in Britain and by the governments of Britain has kind of put it forward as though it is complicated, but actually I don't see it as that complicated at all. In 1917, the area which is called Palestine was then part of the Ottoman Empire, and it was basically, as part of the First World War, that area was divided up by the imperialist powers led by Britain and France. And it was actually the British government of the time, under something called the Balfour Declaration and the Sykes-Picot Agreement with France, that actually gave that area of Palestine away to what is called the Zionist movement. And that was what created the State of Israel. Britain, the imperialists, they wanted a loyal state in the Middle East which would look after their interests. They were particularly interested in the oil from Iran, from Iraq, from what's now Saudi Arabia. So they wanted a state in the Middle East, which is now Israel, which would look after their interests. And we've seen over the decades that Israel has been willing to do that. They've supported apartheid in South Africa, they've supported reactionary regimes across the world, and actually the Palestinian people have been the ones that have been meant to pay for it. And we think that is wrong. The Palestinian people are clearly oppressed by Israel, so we stand up for the Palestinians, same as we stand up for any oppressed people around the world.
What's the ordinary man in the street Israelis view on the Palestinian situation?
It's a complicated, that is itself is a complicated question, because actually in Israel itself, what is called Israel these days, which is a state built on occupation and bloodshed, actually there's a large section of society that that benefits from that benefits from the occupation, benefits from land being taken away from the Palestinians. But actually there's also people within Israeli society that stick up for the Palestinian people, and I think that's important. It's important for people to recognise in the world today that there's a difference between being Jewish in this country and supporting Israel. There are lots of Jewish people in this country that actually support Palestine, that defend the right of Palestinians to exist. Being Jewish doesn't necessarily mean that you support the Israeli state and its aims.
So you mentioned shops like Tesco's. If people boycotted Tesco's altogether, would every little help?
Of course it would, but actually we're not calling for people to boycott Tesco today. I mean, I wouldn't stand against anyone that did call for a boycott of a corporation like Tesco, which pays its workers in this country and in the third world a pittance while giving its bosses massive bonuses. We're calling for people to boycott Israeli goods, and I think it would be good if people who shop in Tesco, actually speak to the management about this. They have goods on the shelves for example, passion fruits or avocados that say products of Israel. Actually, some of them are products of settlements which are built on occupied Palestinian land in the West Bank. So if we can bring this to the attention of more people, we can build a bigger movement to, call for a total boycott of Israel.
Thanks for talking to us, Lewis.